Hi everyone, we're back. Sorry about that. We had technical difficulties. My phone just went crazy. I hope you guys come back. But we're just going to continue our interview here. Thanks for coming back. We're back. I apologize about that. That was just a technical problem. Thanks for coming back. Okay, so we were just going to go on to the next question, which is there's people who don't want accessory dwelling units. I come from a world where we all want accessory dwelling units, but there's people who aren't comfortable with it, and that's why it's not allowed currently. Like, there is resistance to accessory dwelling units, and I'm just wondering what you've seen in your work and with your interaction with communities, and why there's they're not excited about accessory dwelling units. Like, what are people worried about?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that we've got a lot of great neighborhoods in Phoenix, right? They're each unique. A lot of them have a different look and feel, and I think the idea for some folks is that the allowance for ADUs could change that dynamic that they really love and enjoy about their neighborhood. For some, for a while, the issue of if you have a neighborhood with really small lots, right, and you add and activate that space, a decent amount of time, that's going to require that person living in there, because it's Phoenix, to probably have a vehicle. Well, if it's a small lot, where does that vehicle go? It most likely would go on the street. And for a variety of people, having more and more cars parked on a residential street kind of is not something that's consistent with the aesthetic that they were hoping and wanting when they invested in their home, and potentially causes for some the perception of some safety issues as well. I'll tell you one of the larger challenges we have in changing the code to allow it, because we're working through how do we address this concern, is the issue of single-family short-term rentals, right? So VRBOs and those kinds of things is, for some, it's a challenge just with the house, the entire house being rented out. Does the allowance for ADUs sort of make short-term rentals even more pervasive than they are today? We certainly have the benefit of now kind of watching other cities like Tucson and other municipalities across Arizona that have allowed it, to see if that's the case. And what are the conditions that need to be in place for a neighborhood that could have the capacity to take on ADUs? Maybe where one doesn't. And so those are the kinds of things that we're fleshing out to see if we can make sure that we're setting up a neighborhood to be successful with that, and maybe realizing or acknowledging that maybe some neighborhoods just aren't positioned for it for a variety of reasons. Yeah,
so I know that several cities around the country have legalized it, and they've been legal for a while, like Seattle and Vancouver isn't in America, but they've legalized it. I think they even allow 2 ADUs per lot, which is kind of amazing. But have you sort of garnered any data from those cities in terms of their successes and failures around that?
We started to take a look. I think that as part of the Housing Phoenix plan, part of what the initial sort of study about ADUs was, do they address not only a housing sort of capacity issue, but an affordability issue as well, right? And there's not a lot of great data about their success there, but they certainly do add to the housing stock and the diversity of housing types in the city. We'd acknowledge that. Their utilization, their increasing use as a short-term rental eliminates their contribution to being, to the housing stock. They're not being used to live in. They're being used as a vacation destination, right? Oh. And so how do we find? Is there a space? So I think part of what we're researching now is how do we ensure that if we do allow them, not that I'm not trying to demonize short-term rentals, right? But if there's a conversation about these are supposed to be contributing to adding a new option for housing and living for Phoenix residents, is there a regulatory framework that we can put in place to make sure that that's more likely to happen than not? And so that's what we're also now going back and taking a look at some of these cities who have put that in. Are they running into issues? Is there anything within their regulatory framework that addresses or speaks to a short-term rental component that all cities are working with their residents on? So
Right. So basically, the things that people are worried about are parking and short-term rentals taking over their neighborhoods with ADUs. Is there any other thing?
No, I'd say those are two of the big ones, right? I think just basically what those two hit on, and so I think some of the other smaller issues is just a loss of neighborhood character, right? That the idea that you kind of know the people coming and going from your streets on a regular basis, and inserting folks that maybe aren't there as long, and can be unsettling for some folks. And so how do we work through that? But I'd say parking and short-term rentals are two of the primary things we've heard about with respect to concerns allowing them in other areas.
I see. Okay. And maybe also sort of like just in general, like unease with loss of character and loss of maybe a sense of safety, not knowing who, I mean, that just is probably some perception.
Sure.
And not real, backed up by data. So those are interesting to know about, so that we can address some of these concerns, because they're real, and people that are a little bit can be afraid of ADUs because of these reasons. And I think if we're more aware of what people are afraid of, we can address that and try to mitigate some of that stuff. So
yeah,
that's great. And with poor connection, can you guys see us? I hope we're back. But we were talking earlier about how a lot of people, I mean, just truth be told, already have accessory dwelling units, even though they're not legally allowed. Because as Josh said, the only thing that defines an accessory dwelling unit are the cooking facilities. It's that stove outlet. So sometimes people will just like have a hot plate and just like live, and if that's legal, just to have a hot plate, right?
Yeah, if that hot plate's just plugging into a normal outlet, yes.
So that's perfectly legal. So a lot of people will just do that and have a perfectly nice like little like dwelling that they don't have a full stove, and that's totally fine, and that's like 100% legal.
Correct.
Okay, so that's great, but there's obviously people who are after the fact, after they get a permit, they're going to put that stove, they're going to put like an illegal stove outlet in. And Josh is not going to condone that, and we don't condone that, but it's happening, and it's showing that there is a demand for ADUs. They're already happening, especially in these neighborhoods that have detached garages that are just so perfect for having accessory dwelling units, having rental income, having mother-in-law suites, things like that. So this is already happening, and you're aware of that, right, Josh? Like, this is happening. The city is aware of this.
We are. The city does enforcement on a complaint-driven basis.
Okay.
And generally, you won't see that come up unless a neighbor is, really being overt about doing something. They're throwing parties in there. They're renting it out in a way that poses challenges to the community. Because if you have a good neighbor, they could probably rent it out, and not many people might notice, right? But generally speaking, we don't get involved unless there's an issue of a violation that's come up or we've been engaged with a complaint.
Okay. And then I did want to bring up the parking issue. So, I guess right now it's sort of a moot point because they're not allowed. So obviously there's no parking regulations, and I guess if it's a multifamily district, then zoning, then the parking regulations for that come in play. Right? Okay. So I would love to talk more about like this change that might be coming up. Can you tell us like the steps, what's going to happen next? Like what's the next step right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think right now, as I said, we're compiling a couple different scenarios or options for the community to consider. I think we'll be having some conversations with our mayor and council about which of these options appears to be most palatable based on what they've been hearing from their community, and maybe we take a couple of those options out. So all text amendments are required at a minimum to go to our village planning committees twice. And so the City of Phoenix, if you're not aware, for those of you on the call, 520 square miles is split up into 15 urban villages. Each of those villages has a citizen-appointed committee by the mayor and council to provide feedback and guidance and recommendations on planning and zoning items. So text amendments are one of those. So we would take the text amendment, the draft of that text amendment, to the village planning committees at least twice. I think in this instance, because we know there's going to be a lot of good discussion, we'll probably just take the concepts first. And before we really kind of finalize language on one of those concepts, we'll start to fill out each of the committees. And so we'll start that conversation early next year. Based on that feedback, then we would come back and say, all right, here's what we heard. We think going out with a draft that does this. Maybe it's a draft for only these kinds of areas that meet these kinds of criteria, or geographically we know most of these neighborhoods are just going to meet that, so we'll focus on these particular villages or within a certain distance. And I believe Tucson, you can do it within a certain distance of mass transit or a bicycle facility. So we'll talk through that. Once we have the draft language, again, we'll have a village planning committee meeting, once for information, once for action. Then it goes to the planning commission, and then it ultimately has a hearing before the mayor and city council. Mayor and city council are the final ruling on that. And so if they approve, then it becomes law and the zoning ordinance is updated. So usually that's at least 6 months process. Depending on how conversations start and what kind of feedback we get early next year, I could easily see that going into the fall of next year. Because whenever you're changing the code, we don't want to rush it. We don't want to do anything that is going to be pose more challenges or unintended consequences for our neighborhoods, and so we'll be very thoughtful and collaborative with them as we do this, and hopefully come up with something that we can get everybody on board with. But that could take time.
Yeah, so it's possible that maybe sometime next year, by the end of next year, we may have a text amendment allowing ADUs in certain circumstances.
It's possible.
It's possible. I see you don't want to get our hopes up.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of good conversation we have to have, and while I think we have some good data and good guidance from what other cities have done, Phoenix is its own unique place, right? And our residents have their own unique feedback and perspectives, and we need to make sure that we take that into account. And so if that requires us to spend a little bit more time, go back to the drawing board, make some adjustments, then we need to do that. We need to be responsive so that again, we're bringing something to the council that has the feedback of the community embedded in it. And so I can't commit to saying that's going to happen in this time frame, but this just kind of give you an outline of how the process works.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And I mean, obviously it's super exciting to even have this process in play, and that there's a possibility of having an amendment that would allow ADUs, even if it's in a limited area, because that's a great start, and then we can build on that. But can you tell us how people can get involved and how people can show up at these meetings to sort of advocate or raise concerns about ADUs?
Yeah, absolutely. So for our village planning committees, we post those at least 10 days in advance of the meetings. Right now, those are all virtual. I think as we get into 2023, there certainly could be a scenario where we're back in person or we're doing a little bit of both. Maybe one of the meetings is virtual, maybe one of them is in person. We're in the process of figuring that out. But we'll have a lead staff person, and we'll promote a web page with information about the TA, the text amendment on there. But I'd say the village planning committees are a great place to start. Especially because they're with, they have representatives from your local area on there. You can connect with the planner directly working on that. And so, for all of you who might be interested in participating, you can go on phoenix.gov, spend a little time, just figure out what village you're in, and then you can look up and find when your village planning committee meets.
I see. Okay, and then will there be sort of like an alert about when this issue will be discussed?
You know, because we know a lot of people are interested in it. We'll work with our planning, our public information officer to put some information out on social media. So follow us on Instagram, or Twitter, or Facebook, City of Phoenix. We always put out notices about our village planning committees, and so I think when we're covering topics like this, we'll make sure to note that that's something on the agenda. Okay. So between social media, watching the notices that are posted for the village planning committees, or happy to share my contact information. Don't ever hesitate to reach out, and I can give you an update on where things stand when we get going.
Okay, that sounds good. And I'll try to keep in touch with Josh and try to disseminate information through this page as well about anything that's going on with ADUs, opportunities to participate. So, well, this is super exciting. I actually didn't know that there was an amendment coming up, or a possibility of an amendment coming up, and working on that next year. So things are looking very hopeful for maybe getting ADUs legalized, even if it is in a limited way at first. So this is fantastic news, and just really excited about next year. Hopefully a lot of us can participate and advocate for the ADUs if that's something that you want in your neighborhood, because I think it's important to come out and really vocalize that. Anyway, I would just want to thank Josh again for spending his valuable time talking about this issue and educating us all about what's going on, what the situation is now, sort of what's going on in the future, and things that are coming up and ways we can participate. So thanks for joining us today. And yes, and I can see someone is asking for your contact information, so I'll put your email. Is that okay? Your email on the captions when I post this.
Absolutely.
So I'll do that, and let's see if there's any other questions. There might have been questions earlier, but maybe we were busy talking. But you can always ask me questions, and I can clarify later. I'll also write a follow-up blog post about this conversation, so that we have a little bit more information as well. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you guys, and this is going to be posted on the Das Katri Studios Instagram page, so you can refer back to it. I'll have Josh's contact information there as well, so you can reach out to him. You can always reach out to me as well if you have any questions. I can put you in touch with Josh, or whatever I know I'll try to help you with. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.